Chosen one, listen closely and with intention. What I'm about to share is not for the masses. This message carries weight, urgency, and divine timing. If your heart is not aligned with God, these words may feel unsettling, and that feeling is your cue to step back. But if you're still here, if your spirit feels steady instead of shaken, it's because you were prepared for this exact moment. You are here because this message was meant for you, delivered on purpose, at the right time. Today, I bring both a warning and a clear instruction. A season is shifting. The long period of waiting is drawing to a close. The time of hiding is ending. Chosen one, your call to step forward is now. It is time to lead the 144,000. This is not about status, recognition, or titles. This is about spiritual authority, obedience, and carrying responsibility aligned perfectly with God's timing. Something deep inside you already knows this. You've felt the stirring, the pressure building, the sense that something greater is unfolding. And by the end of this message, many pieces of your journey will finally make sense. Stay with me to the end. What is about to be revealed will calm your mind and strengthen your spirit. Before we go deeper, do this. Like this video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Turn on notifications, share it with other chosen ones who need this message, and comment 444 below as a declaration that you are grounded, aligned, and ready to walk in divine order. Now, let's bring clarity. Who are the 144,000, truly? Before anyone can lead, they must first understand what they are called to steward. Here is where confusion often takes hold. The number 144,000 has been talked about, debated, and misunderstood, often even misused. But God never intended it to feed ego or create division. The truth is quieter, deeper, and far more demanding than most are ready for. The 144,000 are not defined by bloodline, denomination, popularity, or outward performance. They are defined by alignment, by obedience, by the purity of intention. They are souls who chose God even when it required sacrifice, sacrificing comfort, relationships, or certainty. They are not perfect, but they are disciplined. They are not loud, but they are consistent. They are not marked by words alone, but by how they live when no one is watching. If this message is touching your spirit, don't forget to subscribe now so you won't miss the next part, where we uncover even deeper truths about your calling and the path of the 144,000. Many want the identity because it sounds significant. Few are willing to live the life that shapes it. This path demands restraint. It requires humility. It calls for the ability to walk away from validation and remain rooted in truth. The 144,000 are not chasing recognition. They are carrying responsibility. Understand this clearly. Being counted among them does not mean superiority. It means accountability. God requires greater discipline, deeper integrity, and unwavering obedience from those entrusted with this assignment. Leadership in God's kingdom is not about rising above others. It is about lowering yourself in service. If that truth does not resonate, this calling will feel burdensome instead of honorable. The world teaches leadership as control. God defines it as stewardship. The 144,000 are entrusted, not exalted, assigned, not celebrated, positioned to carry light into places others avoid. That's why their lives often feel heavier. That's why ease rarely follows them. God does not invest deep preparation into shallow purposes. Here's what many miss. People fixate on the number and overlook the heart posture. God has always cared more about who you are becoming than the title you claim. The seal of the 144,000 isn't symbolic. It's a level of alignment where compromise feels foreign. A place where your conscience refuses to negotiate with darkness. That explains why you've always felt different. Not better, just different. Why certain things never satisfied you. Why peace left whenever you tried to ignore conviction. That wasn't punishment. That was protection. God was training your discernment long before you understood the process. The 144,000 chose refinement over rebellion. They learned to listen instead of react, to observe instead of imitate, to wait when everything in them wanted to move. That is why God trusts them. Trust is built through consistency, not declarations alone. Let me correct another misunderstanding. Spiritual gifting does not equal readiness. Not everyone with gifts is called to lead the 144,000. God does not place sacred responsibility in immature hands. Leadership here requires emotional stability, spiritual maturity, and the ability to carry truth without rigidity. That's why you were isolated. That's why your circle narrowed. That's why distractions faded. It wasn't punishment, it was refinement. Fewer voices brought greater clarity. And clarity is the foundation of spiritual leadership. The 144,000 are not passive followers. They are aware carriers of truth. They don't move blindly. They discern. They don't act emotionally. They move intentionally. Leadership among them cannot be forceful. It must be calm, grounded, and demonstrated through example. Chosen one, leadership here is not about commanding others. It's about walking so aligned with God that others feel safe walking beside you. It's about embodying peace in chaos, authority without ego. That's why God took His time with you. Many couldn't endure the preparation you faced. They would have grown bitter. You grew deeper. They would have hardened. You became softer, but stronger. That balance is the mark of the 144,000. Do not rush to name yourself. Let your life speak. God does not seal words. He seals consistent choices. And if you're still here, still listening, still seeking understanding instead of attention, that alone reveals something about your spirit. You weren't drawn to this message by chance. Your soul recognized truth before your mind could fully grasp it. And now that you understand what the 144,000 truly represent, you can see why leadership here is not a privilege. It is a sacred responsibility. In the next part, I'll explain why God prepared you in silence, away from applause, away from familiarity, away from support. Because what He was forming in you could not be rushed, and it could not be revealed too early. And let me steady your heart, because some of you are feeling the weight of this settling in. This path isn't glamorous, it isn't easy, and it isn't casual. But God never assigns weight without also supplying strength. What feels heavy now will become natural in alignment. The 144,000 are sustained by inner conviction, not external motivation. When applause fades, they remain steady. When misunderstood, they remain anchored. When unseen, they remain faithful. This is why leadership among them requires depth. And here is what many overlook. The 144,000 do not need to be convinced of truth. They need to be reminded of it. Leadership in this realm is not about fixing people. It's about frequency. When you speak, something inside them awakens, like a memory returning to the soul. That's why God refined not just your words, but your pauses, your restraint, your quiet. If you've ever wondered why surface-level talk drained you, why shallow bonds felt hollow, why constant noise unsettled your spirit. Now it makes sense. Your soul was being trained for depth, and depth is essential when leading those who walk closely with God. This is not accidental. This is affirmation. Why were you prepared in silence? Chosen one, this is where emotions often surface. Because when you reflect on your journey, one truth becomes undeniable. God didn't shape you in crowds. He shaped you in quiet. He didn't refine you through ease. He refined you through separation. And for a long time, you couldn't understand why. There were seasons when you felt invisible, times when your voice carried no echo, moments when loyalty was returned with betrayal, sincerity was met with confusion, and obedience seemed to yield no reward. But that quiet was never neglect. It was design. God was working deeply in you, work that could not survive distraction. Public preparation builds skill. Silent preparation builds character. And character is the true foundation of spiritual authority. God will never release influence to someone whose inner world is unstable. So before He entrusted you with impact, He entrusted you with solitude. That's why people drifted away. That's why relationships ended without closure. That's why doors shut, even when you were qualified. God wasn't turning you away. He was guarding what He was forming. Some people couldn't remain because they would have disrupted the process. Others couldn't understand because they were never meant to. Silence stripped you of false identities, of approval-seeking, of the need to be understood by everyone. And though it was painful, it was clarifying. You learned how to sit with yourself. You learned how to listen. You learned how to hear God without background noise. Many would have grown resentful there. You grew inward. You reflected. You examined yourself instead of blaming the world. That alone reveals maturity. God watched how you responded when no one was watching. He observed whether you would become hardened or softened, and you chose depth. What felt like isolation to you was intimacy to God. While others were distracted by constant motion, you were being trained in discernment. While others chased visibility, you were learning patience. And patience is not inactivity. It is disciplined trust. Let me speak to a pain you rarely voice, the ache of being misunderstood by those you cared about, being judged for your quiet, being labeled distant when you were simply discerning. God allowed that discomfort because leadership requires standing firm without explanation. You were taught not to over-defend yourself. You were taught to let truth reveal itself in time. You learned that silence often carries more authority than argument. These were not random lessons. They are leadership tools. Yes, there were nights you questioned God. Nights you wondered if you were forgotten. Nights when obedience felt isolating. Those questions did not disqualify you. They refined you. God is not threatened by honest searching. He is challenged by prideful certainty. And even when you didn't understand Him, you never stopped seeking Him. Silence also healed places you didn't realize were wounded. It forced unresolved emotions to the surface. It slowed you down enough to feel what you had been suppressing. Healing cannot occur at the speed of distraction. That's why stimulation was removed. That's why your circle shrank. That's why familiar comforts lost their appeal. God was recalibrating you, teaching your spirit to find safety in Him alone. Leaders who rely on people for emotional stability collapse under pressure. You had to become internally anchored, not numb but grounded, steady even when circumstances were unstable. Silence teaches that better than any sermon ever could. You didn't lose time, you gained depth. While others collected experiences, you accumulated wisdom. While others networked, you discerned. While others built images, you built substance, and substance endures. Silence purified your motives. It revealed why you truly wanted to serve God. Was it to be seen or to be aligned? When no one affirmed you, when applause was absent, when faithfulness went unnoticed, you stayed. That answer told God everything. Trust is not formed through loud promises. It is built through quiet consistency, obedience without reward, faithfulness without recognition. The quiet also sharpened your awareness. You became observant. You sensed shifts. You learned to read beneath words. You discovered that not everything spoken is true, and not everything quiet is empty. That discernment is essential when guiding spiritually aware people. The 144,000 cannot be led by impulse. They require leaders who can sense without reacting, pause without panicking, and hold space without control. Silence trained you for all of that. And hear this clearly. The quiet is ending. Not because you demanded movement, but because you matured within stillness. God doesn't release leaders when they're tired of waiting. He releases them when waiting no longer governs them. You no longer depend on validation to feel secure. You no longer confuse motion with progress. You no longer need reassurance to remain faithful. That's how God knows you're ready. So if your journey felt slower, heavier, lonelier than others, now you understand. God wasn't postponing you, He was deepening you. And depth is non-negotiable for those called to lead the 144,000. In the next part, I'll explain the difference between being called and being sent, because many receive the call, but only those shaped in silence are entrusted with timing. And one final truth for the places in you that still ache. Silence taught you how to hear God without urgency. Where you once rushed decisions, you learned to wait for clarity. That restraint is not weakness, it's wisdom. The quiet trained your nervous system to stay calm in uncertainty. That's why chaos no longer excites you, and drama no longer draws you. You've outgrown noise. You crave truth, depth, and stillness. That isn't withdrawal, it's refinement. And notice this, the silence didn't harden you, it softened you. You became slower to judge, quicker to understand. You learned that people move from wounds, not just intentions. Leaders without compassion become controlling. Leaders shaped in silence become safe. So don't resent the quiet seasons. They were shaping the leader heaven could trust. Those seasons were never wasted. They were holy training grounds. Every prayer that seemed unanswered, every breakthrough that took longer than expected, every quiet morning where nothing appeared to change was shaping your inner posture. God was never training you to impress people. He was shaping you to carry people. And now, as life begins to get louder again, you'll notice something powerful. The noise no longer owns you, because you were formed in stillness. The difference between being called and being sent. Chosen one, this is where confusion finally gives way to clarity. Many people recognize that God has called them, but very few understand the moment when God sends them. Misunderstanding this difference is what leads to exhaustion, frustration, and spiritual burnout. You were protected from that, even when it felt like delay. A calling is an invitation. A sending is authorization. God awakens many hearts, but He releases only those who are ready to carry responsibility without losing alignment. The call stirs something within you. The sending positions you. And between those two moments is preparation that cannot be bypassed. You sensed your calling long before now. You knew early that your life was meant for more than survival. That awareness wasn't ambition. It was recognition. Your spirit recognized God's voice before your mind could fully articulate it. But recognition does not equal readiness. That's why God slowed your pace. When someone is released too soon, they rely on passion instead of wisdom. Passion burns fast. Wisdom sustains. God wasn't trying to quiet your fire. He was teaching it discipline. Undisciplined passion, even with good intentions, can cause harm. You may have noticed opportunities appear and then fade, doors opening but not fully releasing. That wasn't confusion. That was calibration. God was observing how you handled anticipation, whether you would rush ahead or remain obedient, whether movement would tempt you to act without instruction. Being called feels exciting. Being sent feels sobering. When God sends someone, He doesn't just give direction. He gives weight. You begin to feel responsibility for others, not just concern for yourself. You become more thoughtful, slower to speak, slower to judge, more aware of impact. That awareness is a sign the sending is approaching. Here's another distinction. When you're only called, you still look for validation. When you're being sent, you look for alignment. Applause loses its grip. Recognition becomes secondary. Obedience becomes central. You start measuring success by peace rather than attention. That's why God waited until your identity stabilized. He didn't want your worth tied to outcomes. Leaders who lead for validation often manipulate without realizing it. Leaders who lead from alignment can be trusted. And hear this clearly. Fear does not disqualify you. Pride does. You may still feel nervous. You may still question yourself. That doesn't mean you're unready. It means you respect the weight of what you're stepping into. God doesn't send those who feel invincible. He sends those who know they need Him. Sending also doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks quiet. Sometimes it looks like consistency. Sometimes it looks like standing in the same place, but standing differently. Sent leaders don't always change locations. They change atmospheres. That's why your presence feels heavier now. Why people open up to you without knowing why. Why your words carry more impact even when you speak less. That's not coincidence. That's authority settling in. When God sends, He also covers. You'll notice alignment without force. Resistance still exists, but it no longer confuses you. You're no longer reactive. You're responsive. That shift alone tells you something has changed. Don't compare your timing to anyone else's. God sends based on capacity, not competition. Some are sent publicly, some privately. Both matter. Both are seen. And here's the part that brings peace. Being sent doesn't mean you suddenly have every answer. It means you trust God enough to move step by step. Clarity follows obedience, not the other way around. You are not late. You are not behind. You are right on time. Waiting didn't disqualify you. It prepared you. As the sending draws closer, you may feel a quiet seriousness settling in. That isn't heaviness. It's readiness. You may also notice subtle changes. You feel less impulsive and more intentional. Decisions take longer, not because you're uncertain, but because you're more aware. You think beyond yourself. That's not hesitation. That's responsibility awakening. When you're only called, speed feels important. When you're being sent, precision matters more. God isn't rushing you because what you'll carry requires accuracy. One careless word can undo trust. One emotional reaction can confuse those watching. That's why God slowed your speech and sharpened your listening. You may also notice certain desires falling away, not because they were sinful, but because they were unnecessary. God removes excess before releasing authority. He simplifies your life so your focus becomes clear. Sent leaders cannot afford divided attention. Another sign of sending is this: you stop trying to prove yourself. You stop explaining your calling. You stop needing agreement. Not out of pride, but out of peace. When instruction is clear, validation is no longer required. That quiet confidence isn't arrogance, it's surrender. And understand this: being sent doesn't mean you'll never return to stillness. God sends in seasons. He advances, then grounds. He moves, then stabilizes. Don't mistake future quiet for regression. Even sent leaders return to silence for recalibration. So if you feel calm yet serious, focused but unhurried, if your prayers are simpler yet deeper, that's not confusion. That's alignment. The call has matured. The sending is unfolding. And you are responding exactly as you should. What it means to lead without force. Chosen one, this is where God's leadership completely diverges from the world's model. What you're being entrusted with cannot be sustained through pressure, control, or dominance. The leadership forming in you is steady, grounded, and deeply rooted. God never leads through fear. He leads through truth. And that is the kind of leader you are becoming. Truth doesn't need to shout. Leadership is often mistaken for authority that demands obedience. But spiritual leadership moves differently. It invites alignment. It doesn't coerce. It doesn't manipulate. It doesn't hurry. Leading the 144,000 requires a presence that is steady enough to inspire trust, not forceful enough to intimidate. You've been learning this all along, often without realizing it. Notice how your approach to others has changed. You no longer feel compelled to convince anyone. You no longer argue to be understood. You speak when it matters and stay silent when words would dilute truth. That is leadership without force. Force is born from insecurity. Control comes from fear of losing influence. God removed both before releasing authority into your hands. That is why He healed your obsession with being right. That is why He loosened your grip on outcomes. Leaders who need to control cannot truly guide others. The leadership God is shaping in you works through example. Your consistency speaks louder than instruction. Your calm teaches more than your words. People are not drawn to your certainty. They are drawn to your stability. In a chaotic world, stability is rare, and rare things carry value. Leading without force also requires boundaries. Not everyone needs access to you. Not every question needs an answer. Not every opportunity needs a yes. Boundaries are not walls. They are frameworks that preserve clarity. God taught you this in silence so you would never mistake compassion for self-betrayal. Listen carefully. You cannot lead spiritually aware people by overpowering them emotionally. The 144,000 discern energy before words. They sense intention before instruction. If your inner world is unsettled, they will feel it. If your spirit is grounded, they will trust it. That is why God stabilized your emotional core. Leadership without force demands self-mastery. You learned to pause instead of react, to feel without being ruled by emotion, to remain present without absorbing chaos. These are not personality traits. They are spiritual disciplines. You may have noticed people now come to you in moments of overwhelm, not excitement. That is not coincidence. God positions leaders where regulation is needed, not where noise is loud. You bring calm where anxiety dominates. That is authority. Leading without force also means releasing the need to rescue everyone. Many leaders fail here. They overextend, carry burdens that aren't theirs, intervene where God is still at work. But you've learned restraint. You trust God's timing for others. That restraint protects both you and them. Leadership isn't about fixing people. It's about holding space while God does the transforming. That requires humility. You are a vessel, not the source. Confuse the two and force enters. God also taught you to lead yourself first. If you cannot regulate your thoughts, reactions, and desires, you cannot steward influence. That is why your discipline increased quietly, why your habits shifted, why your tolerance for excess diminished. Self-leadership always precedes external leadership. Another truth: not everyone will follow you, and that is not failure. Jesus never forced alignment. He offered truth. Those ready followed. Those unready walked away. Leadership without force accepts this without resentment. You are not called to gather everyone. You are called to walk faithfully. Those meant to walk with you will recognize your spirit. Authority that must be announced is not yet rooted. Your leadership will often feel subtle. You may question if you're doing enough, but God measures alignment, not volume. Small, consistent actions grounded in truth shift more than dramatic gestures ever could. Leading without force is not passivity. It is intentionality. It is choosing when to speak and when to wait, when to step forward and when to hold back. That discernment is strength, not hesitation. You are not shaped to dominate. You are shaped to anchor, steady, and guide. That is why your presence changes rooms effortlessly. That is why people feel seen around you without being questioned. That is why your silence often carries more weight than your words. This is the leadership the 144,000 respond to: calm authority, grounded truth, steady presence. God trusted you with this role because force was removed long before authority arrived. Now, let's address the internal shift happening in you right now. Chosen one, this part requires honesty. You may feel unfamiliar or even unsettled if you misinterpret it. Something inside is moving, not loudly, not dramatically, but deeply. If you've felt restless, it is not anxiety. If you felt alert or even slightly on edge, it is not confusion. It is recalibration. Your tolerance for noise, empty conversation, and environments that no longer serve you has shifted. Goals that once inspired you now feel hollow. This is not loss. This is refinement. God is narrowing your focus so your energy flows into what truly matters for your assignment. This internal shift often begins with quiet dissatisfaction. You feel like you are outgrowing something, yet the next step isn't fully clear. That in-between space can feel uncomfortable, but it is sacred. Old versions of yourself dissolve here, making way for the new you to emerge. Your mind is more alert, your awareness sharper. You sense patterns without proof. This is discernment sharpening. You notice energy shifts and can read situations intuitively. This heightened sensitivity is essential for spiritual leadership. You cannot steward what you do not perceive. Emotionally, waves of calm may alternate with moments of heaviness. That does not mean instability. It means your inner world is reorganizing. Old emotional responses are losing hold. New responses are forming. Give yourself patience. All transition feels messy before it feels steady. Your body may also signal these changes. More rest, more stillness, slower movement. Moments when your body asks you to pause even if your mind wants to move. Listen carefully. God often speaks through the body when the mind is too busy. Fatigue in this season is integration, not weakness. You may notice detachment. You care, but you are no longer consumed. You love, but you are no longer entangled. That doesn't mean your heart is hard. It means it has learned boundaries. Leaders who absorb everything burn out quickly. God is teaching you how to stay compassionate without carrying what isn't yours. You may feel less reactive. What once triggered you now passes through with less resistance. Or when you react, recovery comes faster. This is not emotional suppression. It is regulation. Regulation is essential. You cannot steady others if your own balance is lost. Prayers may have shifted too, simpler, deeper, more aligned. You now ask for clarity instead of control, strength instead of escape, peace instead of outcomes. That shift is maturity. God listens intently to simple prayers spoken from alignment. And finally, solitude is increasing. Not withdrawal, but integration. Time alone now consolidates your growth. It allows your inner world to settle, your discernment to sharpen, and your leadership to root deeply before it becomes visible to others. Your spirit needs quiet right now. It's adjusting to a new frequency, and noise only disrupts that process. This doesn't mean you're meant to isolate forever. It means this season calls for intentional stillness. Let me assure you, feeling pressure isn't a sign that something is wrong. Diamonds are formed under pressure, but pressure always works best when paired with rest. God never intended for you to grind your way into leadership. He's forming you from the inside out, not forcing you from the outside in. Some of you are sensing a strange balance, confidence paired with humility. You feel more secure in who you are while being deeply aware of your dependence on God. That paradox is a mark of true readiness. Arrogance fades. Self-doubt loses its grip. What remains is quiet, unwavering trust. You may also notice you care less about explaining yourself. You no longer feel the need to justify your choices or convince others of your intentions. This doesn't mean you've stopped caring. It means you trust God to interpret your life on your behalf. Leaders who over-explain dilute their authority. Your relationship with time is changing too. You're less rushed, less frantic. You understand that alignment matters more than speed. Moving too quickly outruns wisdom. God is teaching you to move only when prompted, not pressured. If you feel a draw toward responsibility without a desire for the spotlight, pay attention. God is aligning your desires with your assignment. You crave impact, not attention, substance, not image. That desire was cultivated intentionally. This internal shift may create distance between you and some people who knew you in your previous seasons. They might not recognize you anymore. That's normal. It is not abandonment, it is evolution. Not everyone is ready to walk with you into the next season. Don't resist this process. Don't rush it. Don't label it negatively. God is stabilizing you at a deeper level. What feels unfamiliar now will soon feel natural. Leadership didn't arrive suddenly. It's settled. Now, let's talk about the responsibility of the chosen leader. Authority without responsibility is distortion. God is careful about who He entrusts because leadership is lived, not symbolic. It is carried quietly, consistently, and faithfully every day. The first responsibility is accountability to God, not people. When human approval becomes your reference point, clarity falters. When God's instruction is your foundation, your decisions remain steady, even if opinions shift. That's why He taught you to stand alone, before allowing you to stand before others. Leadership in God's order demands integrity in private. What you tolerate unseen will shape what others experience through you. This is not to intimidate. It's to ground you. Integrity simplifies leadership. When your inner life aligns, you no longer need to manage images. Another responsibility is emotional stewardship. You are accountable for your reactions, not others' responses. You will face projection, misunderstanding, and resistance. How you hold yourself in those moments teaches more than any lesson you speak. Calm presence under pressure builds trust faster than explanation ever could. Consistency is crucial. Anyone can be intense for a season, but few sustain steadiness across time. God values endurance over bursts of effort. That is why He refined your habits, rhythms, and boundaries. You are not meant to impress. You are meant to be reliable. Discernment is another responsibility. Knowing when to engage and when to remain silent protects your authority. Not every situation is yours to manage. Not every question is yours to answer. Over-involvement weakens influence. Carry only what is assigned. Humility is non-negotiable. Leadership is about service, not identity. You are a steward of wisdom, not its source. Staying teachable keeps authority clean. Pride makes it brittle. Your use of influence is sacred. People will listen, trust, and follow. That trust must never be exploited for personal gain. God watches closely how leaders wield power, especially subtle power. Restraint is as important as action. Self-care is essential. Rest is not withdrawal, it is maintenance. Leaders who run on exhaustion make reactive decisions. God honors obedience, not burnout. Protect your capacity so you can serve sustainably. Expect loneliness again. Responsibility creates distance. Not everyone can keep pace with purpose. Do not interpret this as abandonment. It is part of the calling. Leaders are also accountable. Mistakes must be corrected quickly. Realign, don't justify. Humility preserves authority. Responsibility is not fear, it is awareness. God did not choose you to burden you. He chose you because you can carry weight without rigidity, seriousness without losing compassion. Your role is not to be extraordinary, it is to be faithful. God accomplishes extraordinary through faithful hands. Now, chosen one, take a deep breath. Let all you've heard settle. You were never meant to rush into this role, nor to shrink from it. God does not summon without sustaining, assign without equipping, or choose by mistake. The fact that you are here, still listening, seeking alignment rather than attention, speaks volumes about your spirit. You were shaped for this moment long before you realized it. Every delay refined you. Every silence strengthened you. Every letting go made room for truth. Nothing was wasted.